Max, a woman in my section wants to know if we do anything gluten-free. What do I tell her? Tell her she's not allergic to gluten. She's just masking an eating disorder.
Tom has been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. I was really starting to worry.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
One out, nobody on. 2-2 count to Pete Rose. We've just started a wet day in Baltimore. There's a fly ball down the right field line. Tough chance. It's in for a base hit. Rose is coming for two. It gets away from Robinson. Rose hit the dirt. And had he rounded the bag, he might have gone for three. He thought it would be a play on him at second.
Cincinnati's Charlie Hustle, Pete Rose, and this is the way Rose plays the game. Just 150% each and every time, whether the ball is there or not.
This helpful instructional message from the National Association of People Who Have Trouble Walking and Chewing Gum at the same time. Step, chew. Step, chew. Step, chew. Step, chew.
Walt Whitman. Brooklyn Eagle, 1846. In our sundown perambulations of late, through the outer parts of Brooklyn, we have observed several parties of youngsters playing base, a certain game of ball. Let us go forth a while and get better air in our lungs. Let us leave our close rooms. The game of ball is glorious.
You're listening to Braves Country Baseball. Please like and subscribe today. YouTube.com/@Braves Country. All right, let's do it today. I thought this would be a good topic when you start talking about a lot of things in the world of baseball. One of the biggest arguments that I get or hear as well in conversations I'm not even involved in, but I listen to a lot of sports talk radio. I consume a lot of sports talk in general, whether it's television or radio. And there is always this misconception, or the perception is wildly off on how popular baseball is. I hear this more and more from younger folks in the sports talk industry, and I do believe that a lot of it has to do with they're buying into the narrative that they have heard repeatedly on outlets like ESPN and other entities that are trying to push baseball aside because they didn't go all in and spend the money to put baseball on their networks. So they're trying to push it down. I really do. It's a form of almost like the common term now, shadow banning. It's a form of that where they are putting it down because they don't want you to think it's cool anymore, right? The numbers show otherwise. If you look through the numbers over every year, from year to year, the last several years, it's actually gotten more popular. But the misbelief that the NBA is more popular than baseball is just wildly wrong. And it's even gotten more popular over the last few years and growing. And some of it had to do with the fact that the NBA did more to ruin their brand than I would say it was baseball building their brand. I think a lot of folks that used to watch some NBA and a lot of baseball have tuned out, and now they're spending more time watching Major League Baseball. Some of it has been because baseball's taken measures to try to improve the game, pace of play, the clock, right? Also, things like And I always thought this was very interesting. When I first started hearing the conversations of banning the shift, the clock, et cetera, just like a lot of other purists, I dug my heels in. And then I got to thinking about it, and then I would listen to their reasonings for it. And I realized that all along, it was actually a pretty smart, innovative move to do what they were doing. First off, I thought they were playing follow the leader, but instead, what baseball was trying to do more than anything else with the pitch clock and the banning of the shift was one major thing. They don't realistically care about how long a game takes. Sure, it's great when these games end early. And it's funny now because over just a short time period, we're getting spoiled with these games that are typically lasting. Let's be honest, most major league games are now lasting. Your expectations of a major league game now is around 2.5 hours. Sometimes it's a little less and sometimes it's a little more, but that's pretty much where we're at. That's where it was when I was a kid. That's why it was so wildly popular. People would complain about it in the 80s and into the early 90s about how much longer you spent watching a football game than a baseball game. And of course, the argument was always what? Well, it's easy to say that now in retrospect, but the argument was always, well, but baseball's played every day. Football, you're spending once a week. Now, nowadays, you're watching a lot more football than we ever consumed. Football now is on every single night, whether it's college, whether it's pro. You can watch the game of football just about every night during the fall. And there are pockets where it is every night. There's the Tuesday night whack game, or not whack, Mac game. There's usually some random Wednesday game, and they're talking more and more about putting the NFL on a Wednesday. They're putting the NFL on Black Friday now. They're putting obviously the Thursday night game. So, and then of course college football is on Friday. It's on Thursday. It's on Saturday. The Tuesdays, you got the Sunday night football for the NFL. You got the Monday night football. It's wall to wall on Sunday. So nowadays that argument no longer stands. Well, you only watch football once a week. No, it's being watched. It's being played every day, and most games are lasting. The college game, though, they're trying to change some measures. That thing's 3.5 to 4 hours. The NFL game's around 3.5 hours, sometimes a little less. But the big thing with baseball was they didn't care how long the game was when they started these measures. What they were saying is, we want more action. We want to be the anti-NFL, and for kind of a same thing, although it's not the same reasoning, the NBA doesn't have a lot of action anymore. If you look at the game of basketball, it's chuck a deep three. It either hits or it doesn't hit. Then they dribble the ball up the court, might pass it around once or twice and chuck another one. And that's not the action that we grew up. When you were a kid watching basketball, I grew up watching and playing it and falling in love with that sport at the time because there was a lot of action. There was always the ball trying to be pushed down towards the hole, and movement and screens. There was a lot of things that they don't do now today. Now it's more they just stand around. With baseball, you put that pitch clock in, so you're speeding up the time in between pitches, but also there's less strikeouts. Now you still have the strikeouts, but as we go further and further into this, you're going to start seeing these guys in Major League Baseball and in the front office who makes the decisions on who to sign, right? They're starting to value more guys that put the ball in play because the shift has been banned. If you value a guy that puts the ball in play, a guy like Luis Arias of the Marlins becomes much more valuable because he's putting the ball in play and he's making sure that the defense is paying the price for any kind of shift that they do. There's a lot of guys that you can point to that around the league, but you're starting to see it, and you'll see it even more as this goes along. So before we got into why baseball is still America's pastime here on the Once Upon a Pastime series, I wanted to kind of lay the groundwork of the fact that you hear that it's not is wildly wrong. Major League Baseball is still the second most popular sport in America. It's the most consumed. It's the second most viewed. The only reason why it's the most consumed over the NFL is because there's more games played, right? But as far as the consumption and the ratings and whatnot, it's still number 2. It's not particularly close. I know a lot of folks in the South think that college football would be. It's not. College football is very popular, but you got to realize that unless you're in the South or in the Big Ten country, it's not as popular as you think it is. I've lived all over, and it really threw me for a loop when I lived in New York City for a small period of time and in the state of New York, and was shocked, like, man, y'all really don't care about college football, do you? Nah, I could care less. But the minute you start talking about college football, the first thing they'll come back at you with is they are paying attention to the draft. They are paying attention to who their Jets and Giants are drafting, and what do I think of this guy? He played at this school. But if you live in the Northeast, because the college football teams are not that good up there, typically, they don't have the dominance of the Southern football and the Midwest football, there's not a lot of interest. I remember I worked with a guy out on Long Island, huge sports fan. This guy loved sports, him and his brother. His brother, you could not get to watch a college football game. He, on the other hand, followed Penn State, but it wasn't a passion. Now, they were huge Giants fans. Knew everything about them. Never met. I mean, they were consuming. This is right around the time podcasts were becoming relevant, and they were starting to indulge themselves in that. But they were all about sports talk radio. Where could they get more information? Reading up on it online. Da 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 da. And of course, they were baseball fans. When you realize how big of a population is up there in the Northeast, this is why baseball and football, professional football, are king. I guess maybe if you were ranking it, you've got a 1A and a 1B. Although I'm willing to concede that the NFL is 1 and Major League Baseball is 2. The great thing about baseball and its consumption and why people love it, very little of the season overlaps into the National Football League. So this is your springtime sport. This is your summer sport. This is what you love during those summer months. It is America's pastime. It is still everyone's favorite sport to pass the time. I will concede that America's passion is the National Football League. And there's a lot of reasonings for that. Though baseball is the number 2 most bet on, gambled on sport in America. I was about to say sporting event, but sport in America. They're sporting events. The National Football League still dwarfs it because everybody thinks that they can beat the books. And I'm going to tell you right now, newsflash, the books are going to get you in the NFL. If you are betting primarily National Football League, I guarantee you, no matter what you say and what you do and what you put out there, you have a losing record. We have a winning record on our betting over the last 8 years. We're up over 60%. And one of the reasons why is because most of our bets are not pointed towards the NFL. We bet baseball and we bet college football. The NFL, their handicappers are the best handicappers in the world. So if you're out there gambling, you think you're going to beat the books of the NFL, you're not. You're just not. You can get some good intel from time to time and you can get on a hot streak. But if that is the only sport you're betting, I guarantee you over time, no matter how good you are, you will lose. Even the big time high rollers in Las Vegas who sports gambling is their living and they're making big money. They're making most of their money, most of their winning percentages are cushioned by the NFL during the NFL offseason. They have either picked up on college basketball, they have either gone into Major League Baseball, and there are some that have some success with the NBA. There's a lot of reasons why the NBA is very NHL, but the National Football League, it's rigged. Not in the way that all these tinfoil hat folks will tell you that it's rigged. That, oh man, that it's predetermined. You can't predetermine. You cannot predetermine a major sporting event, a team sport like football, baseball, the way you can pro wrestling. You can't do it. There's too many moving parts. And those guys make way too much money to be able to afford nowadays to get them to tank. Because they're like, what am I going to do? I'm going to get kicked out of the league, and then there goes all my deals and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You might be able to get to one here and there, but when I say it's rigged, I mean it's rigged because the house has professionals that are breaking it down to the half point to be able to beat the suckers out there, right? And it's fun to bet on football. I'll never say that it's not. Hell, I do it. But it's much more of a crapshoot. So, with all that being said, the reason why football is so popular is because people still think that they can beat it. There's also the fantasy football aspect. Let's not ignore that. Fantasy football has exploded the NFL. I think it would still be very, very popular and still be number one regardless, but fantasy football has made it even more popular. There are people that I know that don't watch any sports, but they play the hell out of fantasy football. There's a lot of reasonings for that, but that's a different show for a different day. But baseball is still the pastime. Football is the passion, especially professional football. College football, south of the Mason-Dixon, east of the Mississippi. But professional football is still going to be king. Baseball everywhere is the pastime. It doesn't matter what state you're in because you played Little League. Your kids are playing Little League. You've got minor league teams in your area. Do any of you have a minor league football team? No. There's very few of those in the U.S. Baseball is still a sport that you can go out and play a pickup game with your friends. Or you can play a watered down version of it, right? Slow pitch softball, wiffle ball. But you can still go out and play that game, and that's why it'll always be America's pastime. Football, you reach a certain age, you're like, this is not smart to be out here tackling each other Not only could we get injured, you're going to feel it for weeks. So it's still the most relaxing game to just pick up and play with friends. It's still the most relaxing game to consume. And that goes to whether you are consuming it, watching it on TV, going to the game, or still my favorite, just listening to it on the radio. I have a passion for doing play-by-play because I love listening to if I catch a good broadcast, a good radio broadcast of any baseball game, it doesn't matter if I'm a fan of the team or not, I can listen to it. Because it's the only sport that lets the game breathe during the actual game itself. You'll get the pitch, and even with the pitch clock, even today with the pitch clock, I was a little concerned that it was gonna be too much. I would still love an extra 5 seconds in between pitches although I say that now, I've gotten so used to the rhythm that it is. I think I might get impatient. I'm starting to get to where I'm getting impatient with the guys. When there's a runner on base and a guy is taking it all the way down to the 1 second, 2 second mark, I'm in my head, I'm like, let's go, hurry up. But the point I'm trying to make is I didn't think that the broadcast would breathe. I thought going into the season, I was a little concerned. You'd get in there, you'd be doing the game, and you'd be saying something to the effect of, and here's the 2-2 pitch. And then after that pitch is made, he's grabbing the ball and is immediately going back in the pitch. Like, there's no way to let the game breathe and talk to the listeners about other things. What scores are going on out of town? What's, anything that you might bring up. I always have a little list for topics. And then, of course, one of my favorite things to do during my broadcast is the turn back time stuff. The birthdays too, but the turn back time stuff is. So it's things like that when you consume a radio broadcast, you can turn a radio broadcast on a summer day and be out by the water. However that affects you, whether you're at the pool, whether you're on the lake, you're at the beach, maybe you're just sitting in your backyard and soaking your feet in a little kiddie pool with the sprinklers on. However you consume water and sunshine, or a warm summer night, and the crickets are chirping in the background, and the dogs are running around, and you've got a baseball game on. You're not worried about staring at something. You're not worried about you're listening to the game. To me, that's still to me to this day, it will always be the best way to consume a baseball game is the radio broadcast. I am like a lot of other people. I do not like the television broadcasts. They're usually terrible. And it's not all their fault. They've been trained that way. They've been told, do not talk too much. Let the pictures tell the story. And that's fine in a football game because there's a lot of collisions and whatnot. And you can always look up, it's funny when you were growing up, you would always, I can remember my dad and my grandfather telling everyone to keep it down because the only way for them to find out if someone was injured or how badly someone was injured when they were taken off a college football field, which was their favorite sport, was you were waiting for the sideline reporter to tell you. There was no Twitter. Nowadays, I don't worry about it as much. Give it 5 or 10 minutes and you go to said team's reporter and there's usually something up there. But in a football game, I don't even worry about listening to the game anymore. I really don't. It's a lot of fluff, but with baseball, the radio guys they're still good. There's some that are obviously better than others, but I will take a warm southern night in the summer, or a warm summer night anywhere, with baseball on the radio, a cold one in your hand, and near some body of water. I'll take that over the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field, right? Freezing your nards off and your, just absolutely uncomfortable. Most football games I've been to in my life, I've been extremely uncomfortable. You're either there and for whatever reason it is way too hot, day game, or you're there in the wintertime and it's way too cold. There's a pocket, no matter where you live at, there's a pocket of about 3 to 4 weeks that you can go to a football game and not be uncomfortable. That's not the case in Major League Baseball or any baseball. I specifically think Major League because they play a lot of night games. And nowadays you play the night games during the summer under the lights, and it's a beautiful thing. And that's why it's the best pastime there is. And you can take your kids, you can take your family to the game, to the ballpark, and you can afford to do it. A lot of folks can't do that with a game in the National Football League. Not without taking a second mortgage out. And when you're at the game, you can still have a conversation. And that's important. To be able to say, I can remember going to baseball games. We went to a Braves Mets game up in New York. Me and my mom, we just happened to be visiting New York. I said, let's go check out the game. And how cool it was. My sisters went as well, but how cool it was to be able to sit there and to have a conversation with her. And she grew up in that area. So she's recalling and telling me all the great stories about, going there with her dad as a kid. They grew up watching the Brooklyn Dodgers. But then there's also just the conversations of, hey, what's going on in your life? Hey, you don't get that in a football game. It's usually way too loud. There's usually too much tension until the game turns into a blowout. Once the game turns into a blowout, here's the funny thing. If you go to a football game, think about how many times you might have been to a game that got out of hand. And think about how many times you went to a baseball that may have gotten out of hand. And if you answer this honestly, think about the fact that when the football game got out of hand, it was time to leave. When the baseball game got out of hand, it was time to maybe go get another cold one. The game got out of hand. Well, that just meant I get to spend more time with the folks that I came to the game with. The football game gets out of hand. You'll see it. They're in the parking lot. They're leaving. Baseball is the best. We'll be back in a flash. When we come back, we're going to talk about other things that baseball brings to the table and why it is still America's pastime. We'll be back in a flash here on Braves Country's Once Upon a Pastime series. Keep it locked in here.
Cool! Wizard versus nerd! Write you down with my spell! No! Science is the answer!
Northern Tool and Equipment.
My girlfriend has given me a pet name.
I'm afraid to ask.
Snuggle Muffin.
No, it isn't.
And she uses it in public.
Okay, so give your girlfriend a pet name she'll hate, like Thunder Chunky.
I couldn't do that.
I see. Too harsh for Snuggle Muffin. Okay. Drown her out with a 200-mile-per-hour cordless leaf blower.
Got it. Here she comes.
Hey, Snuggle Muffin. What are you doing, Snuggle? Out of here.
Wait. Come back, Thunder Chunky.
There's no problem a little horsepower can't solve.
Armchair.
Rainey against Leary. The way this Leary is pitching, we may have to go back to the hotel and stay in this lousy town for another night. Might be too late to get out of the airport. Boy, he's a slow worker. There's a strike call.
Statute. What? Statute of limitations. It's not a statue. No, it's statue. Fine. It's a sculpture of limitations.
In 1866, at Vassar College, a group of freshmen, with the support of a female physician who thought exercise for women essential to good health, formed the Laurel and Abenakis Baseball Club. Other colleges soon followed suit. They did not play for long.
One day, a student, while running between bases, fell with an injured leg. We attended her to the infirmary with the foreboding that this accident would end our play of baseball.
The teams were soon forced to disband. The game was considered far too violent for young ladies to play.
Welcome back, Once Upon a Pastime Series, as we talk about why Major League Baseball, why the game of baseball is still America's pastime, and what makes the game so great. And look, I know it's a lot of things that people know, but until you really think about why, and I think sometimes it's overlooked, it's overshadowed by. We talked about this in the first segment, but you get a lot of. I'll put it to you this way. I was talking to a guy in the industry one time, and he was saying his argument was that the NBA was bigger. I said, it's not. Look at the numbers. I pulled the numbers, and he was flabbergasted by it. And he said, well, I don't understand why, if it's so much more popular, why did ESPN, why is all their content either the NFL or the NBA? And I said, follow the money. They went in, they made a very poor decision years ago, and they spent a lot of money on coverage of the NBA because they were under the impression it was about to take off and be bigger. And it was off of, look, this is a springboard from the Michael Jordan era, when basketball was a lot more popular. And then, of course, it's not like that was the last time that they had great players, but baseball still is still the most popular championship in all of sports in America is obviously the Super Bowl. The World Series is number 2. And it's not particularly close. They tend to have, even when they're having their better years, and this year NBA playoff numbers were awful, but even in their better years, they're still typically about 20 to 25% less than the Major League Baseball World Series. But I think it's a mistake to always just look at, well, who was most popular in the championship series this year? The only way that becomes newsworthy if for out of nowhere, the Super Bowl, nobody watched it that year. That becomes newsworthy. Other than that, it's usually dependent on who's in the championship. Does America care if this team or that team of this sport, that region of the country wins? You got to look at the regular season. You have to look at the overall. And baseball is a game that people watch day in and day out. Baseball is a game. We talked about how it's the best on the radio, but even if you do like, even if you prefer the television broadcast, there's nothing wrong with that. Some people, they might have a favorite personality that they like on the television broadcast, right? No matter how you look at it, baseball becomes, for the older fan, it becomes a friend. You get older fans, they get up there in life, they get retired, life slows down. They're able to consume more than they've ever, because they're at home more than they ever. And baseball becomes a daily routine that you can count on during those summer and spring months into the early fall. Whether my team's good or not, rise or shine, rise and shine, because it is time to play the game. Unless weather stops you, the game's happening. And the great thing about baseball, if it does get rained out, they make it up to you. So you do rely on them as a friend. How many friends have you had not show up to something and they don't do anything? They don't do anything for you. So that's the beauty of baseball. And especially as you get older, kids leave the house. Maybe you're left by, look, there's a lot of older folks that are living by themselves. They've lost their partner, right? Baseball's there every night. And so it is still the pastime. By that definition, it helps pass the time. You look forward to it. I am married at this point, but I remember when I was single, I looked forward to the nighttime. If I had the night off, and look, I ran around and raised Cain with the best of them. Don't get me wrong. But I looked forward to the nights when I would see. I'm an old restaurant guy, a restaurant business for a long time. I don't know if I'll ever fully leave the restaurant business. I love it almost as much as I love this game. But I would get my schedule and look at it, and when I would see that I'm off this night, and that night, I would match it up with what baseball games are on that night. Now, you obviously do it during the football season too, but the difference would be with football, if I found out the folks were getting together, my friends were getting together to watch Game X, I would get excited about it. With baseball, I did not care if I was meeting up with folks. I was turning that game on, and I was excited about the game. With football, I was excited about, hey, at the end of this week, I'm going to go hang out with a bunch of friends and have a good time. So that's the difference to me, is that I looked forward to the actual game. And when you look at this and you're saying, well, why baseball? If someone's scrolling through and they just stopped in on this channel, I'm like, why baseball? Why do you love baseball so much? It's simply the greatest game that was ever devised. And I can't do it enough justice. It is the greatest game that has ever been devised. There has never been a game that's more difficult and more exciting at the same time. I'm not putting down whatever other sport you may have in mind. I'm not putting that sport down. So I'm not going to tell you why baseball is better than this sport, that sport, and that sport, right? Because I'm not here to tear down other sports. What I'm going to tell you is it is the best game because, first of all, it is a team game that is devised for the one-on-one aspect. Everybody knows football is a team game. Everybody knows basketball is a team game. Hockey, you name it. And yes, you have to win your individual battles as a collective team to win and be a good team and win championships, et cetera, et cetera. But baseball is the one game. First of all, it's because it's the only sport where the defense has the ball. It's the only sport devised that way. And when the defense has the ball and they are pitching, the game stops and it becomes a battle of one-on-one. And it's up to that individual man, that individual person, to beat the guy in front of him. And if we can do it enough in 9 frames on both offense and defense, we can win the game. And we will attempt to do that 162 times in a 6-month span. It is the ultimate marathon. It's also the greatest reality show, reality TV, whatever you want to classify it, it's still the greatest reality ever devised. Because day in and day out, you want to know several things about your team. That's not the case in other sports. If it's a sports like football, you only care once a week, realistically. If it's a sport like basketball or hockey, and I'm going to leave it at those because those are the 4 major. But even soccer is about once a week. But even basketball and hockey, it's not every day. It's 2 to 3 times a week typically. So baseball, typically 5 to 6 times a week, sometimes even 7. And it's so intense of a season if you follow it on a day in and day out basis, excuse me. It's so intense as a fan. You almost welcome that day off, even though you love it dearly, but you're like, man, I got to catch my breath. And then you're ready to ramp it back up again. You care about the injury, the win, the loss, but you also care about how was that bullpen used today? What's it going to look like tomorrow? Hey, if we do this today, how are we going to get through Wednesday? That kind of thing, right? And then, of course, it's also the only sport other than maybe hockey, but hockey doesn't have the layers, that has a true farm system. So nowadays, with everything that you can consume, you can keep an eye on. What about the dude down there in Single A that they said wasn't going to be up for a few years? I see that he just got promoted to Triple A. How much longer before he can come help the team? And it's a constant thing. And also, it's the only sport whose trading deadline is real. It's a real trading deadline. You typically get more deals, more significant deals in Major League Baseball at the trading deadline than you do at any other sport. You could make an argument for basketball and hockey being very relevant in a lot of trade. There are trade deadlines in basketball where it's usually null and void. But there are years in hockey, the same. National Football League's trading deadline, even though we know it, or we're told about it, it essentially comes and goes and nothing happens. Because of the individuality of the sport, it is much easier to make a trade for someone in football. I'm sorry, in baseball, and have them contribute immediately. In football, it's a lot easier to do that during the off season. In basketball, if a guy gets traded over, or in hockey, it's going to take a little bit. But in baseball, you make a trade for, we'll say, a top closer in the game. He gets on a plane tomorrow night, he could be saving the game for you. And so that's why the rarity that sits there, because it is an individual sport that is wrapped in a team game, player movement is more interesting in that sport than any other sport. It is chess compared to checkers. Baseball is a game of chess. Most of your other sports, they're checkers. It's faster moving. It's the athleticism that takes over. In baseball, yes, having a very athletic player, being very athletic, is an advantage, of course. Any sport is. And more so now that you're seeing more movement on the base paths. But the difference is, for instance, I'll take basketball as an example. If you have 2 to 3 of the top 20 players in the game, there is very little chance that you don't make the playoffs because there's so few players on the floor. And there's very little chance that you don't do very well and go deep into the playoffs. That's not the case in baseball. Not really the case in football. But with baseball, when we're talking about the athleticism definitely goes into play. But more so than anything else, it is a mind game. The strategy in baseball, and to be able to react to that strategy, is on so many different levels. And we could take it through the defensive positioning, et cetera, but I don't want to be here all day. So we'll just take, for instance, an at-bat. And we'll compare that to a guy coming up the basketball floor, a point guard. And we'll even make it a little more dramatic. And 8 seconds left in the game, he's got the ball. And there might be a strategy on whether or not he's going to kick it to an open guy, or is he going to go try to beat the defender. The difference between baseball and basketball, that happens every single pitch. Because the pitcher, is he going to try to blow it by this guy, or is he going to try to paint the edges and get him to chase? The hitter, is he going to try to tattoo this ball? Or now with 2 strikes and runner on second trailing by 1 in the 7th, is he now going to try to shorten his swing a little bit and just get the ball in play and see what can happen? Guy comes up in the 7th inning. It's his 3rd at bat. We'll say 6th inning. Got to modernize it, right? Comes up in the 6th inning, the 3rd at bat against the same pitcher. Are they going to leave him in there? Are they going to let him see? Does he have that kind of stuff? And if so, in the first couple of at-bats, he saw these pitches in this sequence. Now we get the 3rd time around. Where does he go? You'll see this all the time. And we'll just take a guy like, I'll take Spencer Strider for the Atlanta Braves as an example. And the first time comes up against, we'll say, whatever team's number 3 hitter. You might see him start off with the hard stuff on the outer edge and then try to get him to chase the slider off the plate once he gets 2 strikes. He comes back on the 2nd at bat, and they may decide to switch it up a little bit. Let's pitch backwards. Let's start him off with a slider, and when we get that 1 strike on him, then we're going to try to pump a fastball by him on the outside. And now with 2 strikes, I can go a number of different ways because now you're really guessing. Is he going to go to the slider to me again on the outside? Because that's how I struck out the first time. But instead, this time, he comes in with some high heat and it jams you, and it's a pop-up to second base. So you come up the third time, and now the game's getting a little long in the tooth. And this at-bat's much more important than the at-bat in the first inning. Or at least it appears that way. And there's runners on second and third, and there's 2 outs, but there's a pretty decent hitter behind me, but I'm the guy. Is he going to pitch to me, or is he pitching around me and saying, I'll take my chances with the next guy? And if he is coming in at me, where does he go this time? He started off with the heat the first time. He's coming in with the soft stuff the second time to start me off. He got me to strike out with the slider in the first at bat. He got me to pop up with the fastball inside on the second at bat. Where's he going now? And that's the constant mental game. And if you're watching the game or listening to the game, that's going through not just your head, but everybody who's paying attention. And now today, with all the new look, they got all the iPads in the dugout and whatnot. Remember when they took that away that one year because of the Red Sox cheating scandal? That was goofy. It's like you're going to punish the entire league because the Red Sox were using equipment that they shouldn't have used. I mean, let's just call it what it is, what they should have done all along. The Astros and the Red Sox both should have had the rings taken away from them. More so the Astros than the Red Sox. I think the Red Sox were doing some stuff that was in the gray area, we'll say. The Astros were definitely over the line. But I also believe if you're going to do it to one, you kind of have to do it to both. So, okay, things like that. Things like Pete Rose, Shoeless Joe Jackson. This adds to why the game is the best. Because it's such a long history. This game has been played for so long, has been so prevalent in American society that it tells the story of this great nation. You can mark the time, you can mark the calendar by what was going on in Major League Baseball. Starting with just after the Civil War. So when we talk about baseball and you're like, well, still not convinced. More books have been written about this game than anything else. More content has been made about this game than anything else. Quality content. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of trashy clickbaits on football during football season. But I'm talking about over time. Real content. The best movies are baseball movies. There's not a football movie ever made, ever will be made, that could hold a candle to the top 10 or 15 baseball movies of all time. Just not. There's some really good football movies. But there are some fantastic baseball movies. There's some pretty good basketball movies. But very little there, very little of either one of those has ever made the movie good because of the actual content of the sport. With baseball, you can actually, it's more cinematic. because you can get better angles and whatnot. But that's another reason why baseball is the best. You give me Field of Dreams. You give me 8 Men Out, Bull Durham, For Love of the Game. I don't want to rattle them all off because I feel like I'll leave one out. Any day of the week over any given Sunday. Or Remember the Titans. And those are good movies. The Longest Yard, the real one, not the goofy one with Adam Sandler and Chris Rock. The real one with Burt Reynolds. They're still not up to par. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more on why baseball is still America's pastime here on the Once Upon a Pastime series and the great stories that have unfolded because of this great game.
Yeah. Prognosis negative.
Smith corks one into right down the line. It may go. Go crazy, folks. Go crazy.
Ortiz in the deep right field.
Touch the ball, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life.
Little roller up along first. Behind the bag. It gets through Buckner. Here comes Knight, and the Mets win it.
This is
Armchair.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
A lot of room in right center. If he hits one there, we can dance in the streets. The 2-1. Swung line drive left field. One run is in. Here comes Brave. He's the throw to the plate. He is safe. Braves win. Braves win. Braves win. Braves win.
Oh, wow. I'm pretty sure that's going to be there it is. Another flag on the play.
Multiple flags on the play. Holding. Offense number 97. That penalty was declined. Touchdown. After the play, unsportsmanlike conduct. Offense number 22. Penalty will be applied to the kickoff.
This is going to be one of the strangest calls.
That son of a... You playing against Dick this week? Yeah. Could be worse, man. When I played against him, he ejected all my players.
What?
Armchair.
At its heart lie mythic contradictions. A pastoral game born in crowded cities. An exhilarating democratic sport that tolerates cheating and has excluded as many as it has included. A profoundly conservative game that often manages to be years ahead of its time.
Please like and subscribe today. Braves Country HD. All right, welcome back. And talking about baseball, why it is America's game, America's pastime. Though we concede that football is America's passion at this point, baseball is still America's pastime. And though you're going to get folks who love football and don't like baseball and love baseball and don't like football, the ones that have embraced it, that understand the game, you can't convince them that any sports even holds a candle to it. And the reason being, man, it's the people. It's the stories. It's the yogiisms. It's the finding things out down the road that you never knew when they're telling stories. You hear the old timers tell some things and you're like, every time I hear one of these anecdotes, it's always, man, baseball's the best. I also believe that the people in the game routinely are the best. I think it's because the game does breathe, right? That more camaraderie is created in a baseball dugout than on a football field or on a basketball court or in a hockey rink. The camaraderie, and not that the camaraderie there should be scoffed at, but it's different in a baseball game and on a baseball team. I think about some of the stories that I've heard over the years, and I won't hit them all because we got things we got to do in this world, right? Other than talk about baseball, but I wish that weren't so. But I think about some of the stories that I've heard over the years. I've never heard anywhere close to the same kind of content with other sports. Yeah, I've heard some great stories here and there, but the sheer volume that baseball gives you. I'll start with, I don't know why this one always stuck out to me, but I was a kid listening to Don Drysdale talk to, I believe it was Joe Garagiola. I could have it wrong. But Don Drysdale, for folks who aren't familiar with him, pitched for the Dodgers. And Don Drysdale, at one point, was looked upon as one of the better pitchers in the game. He also became a television broadcaster, so he would tell stories. You know, the one thing I've never understood, and maybe it's just wasn't in his interest, why did, when he was in his prime, and I'm talking about your mental prime, right? When you're in your 40s to 50s to 60s, I'll even say into the 70s, and even if you're sharp enough into your 80s, because that's when you've got enough life experience where you actually have something I want to hear. I don't really care what a guy in his 20 or 30s, early 30s will say, by late 30s maybe, but I don't care what a guy in his 20s has to say. That's why, look, it's pretty well known in the business, but getting player interviews, though it may feel like that you're getting this really cool thing that's going to happen, it's been known as a ratings killer, because typically you're interviewing a young person who doesn't have a lot of experience, and they're going to give you, unless you're going to find someone who's going to have a meltdown and say the wrong thing, you're going to get a lot of cookie cutter answers. But you get a retired player who no longer gives a crap about what the reaction is. That's when it's money, right? So Don Drysdale, and just to kind of set the scene for you, he won the Cy Young in 1962. He was a 9-time All-Star, 3-time World Series champion. He was an LA Dodger from 1959. I'm sorry, he actually joined the Dodgers in 56 and pitched all the way to 69. So a very well thought of player, and also is in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. But he was telling a story, and forgive me, I don't remember who he was referring to that he was pitching against, and I don't even know if he said it, but I do remember the story of him talking about, it was a hot day one day, and I'm almost positive he was referring to playing the Braves, because I think the game was in Atlanta. And he said that he got the signal from the dugout that they wanted Drysdale to pitch around, to go ahead and intentionally walk the guy at the plate, whoever it was. I don't believe it was Hank Aaron, because I feel like I would remember that. So, but I'm pretty sure it was an Atlanta Brave. So this would have been late 60s, towards the end of his career. So, okay. And he said, man, it was hot that day. And this is back before you could just put the 4 fingers in the air and send the guy down to first. And that is a really good thing that they did. I hated it at the time, because I still like the fact that you could do some things on the base paths, but typically nothing ever got done on the base paths. And the 4 pitches, the intentional walk, sent him down to first. I get it now. At the time I was digging in. But back then you had to throw the pitches. And he said, man, it's too hot. I'm not throwing 4 pitches. So he decided to hit the batter instead. And the story that he tells as he's yucking it up with Garagiola, pretty sure it was like the NBC Game of the Week kind of thing. I mean, they're going back and forth, and he's sharing stories. Garagiola was a great listen. I feel like that's one thing that is missing in today's national broadcast. And I do love Smoltz, don't get me wrong on that. But we don't have the characters that we used to have in the booth doing color. John Smoltz has a great personality, and I think he does a very good job on the Fox games. I know a lot of Braves fans, they can take him or leave him because he has said things that have, you got to understand, he's not up there doing a Braves broadcast, he's doing a national broadcast. So there's going to be a different feeling to it. But when you get into the nuts and bolts of a great baseball broadcast, and maybe this is one of the reasons why the radio is better. It's not just the fact that they paint the picture, but they also tell the stories. Today's television broadcasters that they pick, there's no Joe Garagiola out there. And if you're not familiar with who he is, I'd say just down the road sometime, check out some of Garagiola's stuff. He was on NBC for a while. It was one of my favorite combos of all time was him and Vin Scully. They used to do the NBC Game of the Week. But there were always stories, and he was also very good at when they would have an extra person come in the booth to talk, he would drag the story out of the guy. Hey, I heard about this. Why don't you tell me that? There's no one better in the business than Bob Uecker. Bob Uecker will always be everybody's. Bob Uecker would have been a stand-up comedian if he didn't ever touch a baseball. Bob Uecker's just a funny SOB. And great one-liners. And you don't get these quotes. You don't have this quotable stuff that you do in others. Look, other sports, the game isn't slow enough. So you don't get these great quotes. You don't get, and not to mention, they're not there every day. So an everyday, day in, day out kind of thing, you're going to get more content. You're going to get just better quotes because you're going to get more. Look, there are a lot of quotes out there that aren't worth quoting, right? This is a typical Bob Uecker thing. I won't go into the whole thing. We will be doing one where we're talking about Uecker. But this is a typical Bob Uecker quote. I signed a very modest $3,000 bonus with the Braves in Milwaukee. And my old man didn't even have that kind of money to put out at the time. So, Bob Uecker, he was a Hall of Famer. No, he wasn't horrendous, but he made a living afterwards making sure that he was the butt of his jokes. And that's the kind of stuff that endeared him. You see the social media stuff nowadays where every guy is, I really think of the NBA, but you get a little bit in baseball as well and football, a lot in football, where they're all pounding their chest and trying to tell you how they're the best, they're the greatest, because they look at it as it's going to be a way to get paid one day. But the great thing about guys like Bob Uecker, they were sprinkled all over baseball. And they were okay with being the ones that you laughed at. Remember, this guy ends up being a Mr. Belvedere. He ends up being in one of the most popular baseball movies of all time, the Major League Series. Who doesn't love that line? Just a bit outside, right? He had another great quote where he said, where people were asking him, because he was catching Necro, he said, how do you catch a knuckleball? He said, it's easy. You just wait till it stops rolling and then you go and pick it up. So, these are the great things, and you don't get this in any other sport. And the perspectives that you get from folks, they go on and on and on. We've got the one clip that we play, and it's the old manager from the Boston Braves, the 1914 Miracle Braves. And the old manager, years later, is dying on his deathbed. They ask him, there was a fan that come to see him and asked him, what's killing you? Now, of course, I'm sure it's been revised, but that's what they do. They write it differently, make it funnier. But the famous line is, what's killing you? And they're talking about, he's on his deathbed. He's dying of something. I want to say he had tuberculosis, but I could be wrong on that. But he says, what's killing you? And he just closed. His eyes were closed. He opens them up real quick. He said, bases on balls. It's a great line. Who the hell knows if it's true? But it's a great line. And I am much more likely to be drawn to the funny quotes in the history of baseball than you give me some coined phrase that people like to pound the table from Vince Lombardi. It's more entertaining. And really, when you talk about baseball, you talk about football, you talk about basketball, whatever sport you're talking about, it's still a show. It's just a show. It's there to entertain you. It's fun. It's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to get your mind off of other things. And that's why the game is great. You look at some of the things that when you go through the history of baseball, the bottom line is, along with the strategy and along with, the food in the stands. Who doesn't love a good hot dog or some cotton candy, a cold beer, a crisp soda, whatever your food of choice is at a baseball game? I'll take football tailgating over most, because you normally don't spend a lot of time in the parking lots at a baseball game. You do if it's a big playoff series or whatnot, but so I will concede the food to a football game if you're tailgating, right? Or if you're having a watching party or whatnot. But the food at a baseball game's immaculate. There's something about the game that lends itself to sitting there, getting yourself a little plate of nachos or some popcorn, and slowly just watching the game and eating and enjoying life. But you look at some of the great games in this world, baseball to me, it still tops it all. There was a great quote by Bill Clem, the old umpire, and and the story goes, guy standing at the plate, and he looks and he gets mad at the call from the ump, and then the catcher gets mad at the next pitch. So they thought one was a ball, they thought one was a strike. And this goes on for a good duration of the game. And one of the managers came out to raise Cain about it. And he kept saying over and over again, that's a ball. That's a ball. You have to call it a ball. That is a ball. And Clem's response was, it ain't nothing until I call it. So, Humphrey Bogart, one of the great actors in all of Hollywood history, right? He's seen it all. I love this line that he gave one time. A hot dog at the old ball game beats roast beef at the Ritz. And though we use it in a lot of things, it was Frank Robinson of the Orioles that coined the phrase, close doesn't count in baseball. Close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. It ain't over till it's over. That was Yogi Berra. Leo DeRocher, tell me this isn't a great line. I mean, a fabulous line. Baseball is a lot like church. Many attend, but few understand. Another great one. It's been attributed to a couple of folks, so we'll just leave it at that. But whoever wants to know the heart and mind of the American people had better learn baseball. There are really only two seasons, winter and baseball. You know, there was back in World War II and in World War I, but there's a bit of a famous movie that puts it into light in World War II. They used to make sure that you weren't a spy. They would ask you random baseball questions, and you better know the answer. You better know the answer. If they thought that there was a German spy and they started rattling off questions about the New York Yankees, who everybody followed back then, they were literally America's team. They were so dominant. I'm not saying everybody was a fan, but everybody knew who they were. And they would rattle off questions about the New York Yankees. You know, who's the center fielder for the New York Yankees? Who's doing this? Who's doing that? That kind of thing. If you didn't know the answer, you'd be in some big trouble. I think my favorite quote that's ever been said about baseball, now this isn't funny, this is just, it's one of those reflective ones, and it's been credited to the great Rogers Hornsby, who, by the way, was so fanatical about his eyesight and wanting to make sure that he didn't harm his eyesight. Rogers Hornsby refused to go to the movie theater back then. This is in the 1920s. This is even a little before, you know, obviously, but before the talkies. Because he thought, and probably with good reason, that the flickering that you would get in those old theaters would affect his eyesight. You couldn't get him to do it. You couldn't get him to partake in spirits, alcohol, anything that he thought was going to hurt his batting average. And he was one of the greatest ever. But he was asked one time, because a lot of players back then didn't make enough money for the entire season. Now, some of the stars like Rogers Hornsby did, but even still, a lot of them would go. Even Babe Ruth was known to go and work during the off season Babe Ruth was famously known for chopping wood of his neighbors and whatnot and helping out around during the wintertime, and he did it to stay in shape. I know people might laugh about that when they see pictures of Babe Ruth, but I guess it could have been a lot worse, right? Especially late in his career. The thing is, we see more pictures of Babe Ruth and video of Babe Ruth at the end of his career. Babe Ruth, when he was in his prime, he was just a dude that could bring it. He was never a stick, but he was just a guy with a big, wide back, strong guy that during the offseason chopped a lot of wood. But the quote by Hornsby says, people ask me what I do in the winter when there's no baseball. I'll tell you what I do. I stare out the window and I wait for spring. I put that up on my Facebook. What do they call it? Cover photo. And I put that up there the day after the World Series and leave it up there until spring training every single year. I've been doing it. It's just a tradition for me. I do it every single year. I don't remember how far that goes back. It's at least a decade. And so I'll give you one from Hank Aaron. My motto was always to keep swinging. Whether I was in a slump or feeling badly or having trouble off the field, the only thing I knew to do was to keep swinging. That's a, you know, that it reminds me of is when they talk about the great shooters in the NBA. Have no conscience, have no memory, meaning whether they're hot or whether they're cold, they're going to keep shooting because it's worked in the past. And look, that's Hank Aaron, the all-time home run leader. 755 is real, 762 is not. Every great batter works on the theory that the pitcher is more afraid of him than he is of the pitcher. And that comes from the great Ty Cobb. It's interesting. It's an interesting mindset, basically saying, you wish I wasn't up here right now. I'm not worried because I have to face Walter Johnson. Walter Johnson is worried that he has to face Ty Cobb. That's the mindset. Whether either side is true, that's the mindset. Someone once asked Mickey Mantle if he ever goes up to home plate trying to hit a home run. He said, I sure do. And they said, when? He said, every single time. But this game is it's sprinkled with the best. It's just the best. The quotes, the movies, the people, and the seasons. The seasons make this game the best. More than anything else, if your team won a championship, and I'm not talking about if you're a Yankees fan in the 40s and 50s where they won it every single year and that had to have gotten mundane at one point. I don't believe that that's good for today's baseball or any sport. One dominant team. I think it's always good to have. It's always great to have a team that's going to be up there fighting for it every year, but you don't want that run. But look, in the 90s, when the Braves won 14 consecutive divisions, that was really good for the game. It probably would have been better for the game had they won more than the one championship. But the 4 championships in a row that the that the Yankees won. What was that? 98, 99, 2000, 2001? No, I'm sorry, three in a row. They won 4 out of 5. It was 96, 98, 99, 2000. Of course, 2001 was the famous Luis Gonzalez walk-off. But that was very good for baseball as well. And it was also great that there were years that they didn't get it. But what's great about a game like baseball, and I'll just go back to the 2021 season of the Atlanta Braves. Watching those games, doing those games, and you watched it unfold. It's not just, I didn't just watch. I wasn't the only one that witnessed it. It was really cool to see it through the eyes of folks who were watching along with our broadcast. And they were celebrating. I mean, that was a fun night. We won the championship. I left the chat open. And folks just celebrated. And I had a blast just reading all their celebration chats. In fact, there were fans from other teams you wouldn't expect to be in there. They were congratulating Braves fans. And you may say, well, we didn't do anything. Yeah, we did. We stuck through it thick and thin. So yeah, we did. Especially if you're talking to someone who hadn't seen them win a championship since 1995. Yeah, they did. That fan did something. They were there for them. They bought their shirts. They bought their jerseys. Even the fans that might have disappeared for a minute but came back because they were excited the team was good again. Remember, there was a tough stretch there in the mid 2016 to 20, I guess from 2014, 2015-ish through the 2000s, just before 18, before the run started again. So we'll say 2015, 16, and 17. Those are some lean years. So yeah, you did do something. But the whole thing about that is because the season is so long and so grinding and so many ups and downs, you're going to lose 50 to 60 games, even if you're one of the best teams ever. That Braves team lost over 80 games, not counting postseason. And then they put it together, and you saw this roller coaster take off. So when your team wins it, no matter who you're a fan of, if you're a Dodgers fan, you haven't seen a real world championship since 88. If you're a Mets fan, you haven't seen it since, 86. If you're a Astros fan and you saw it last year, but you felt like that was really your first one because everyone keeps slamming you for the 2017 trash can incident, which, by the way, had nothing to do with the Astros fans. That was the players wearing the uniforms. Isn't it funny how Mike Fiers got shadow banned over all that? I mean, you didn't see him anywhere. He got lifted. I saw a thing on him the other day. He ended up in the Mexican Baseball League. But the entire crescendo that it takes a day in and day out when your team does win it all. That's why baseball is the best. Even if they fall short at the end of the season, I always say to myself, yeah, but man, they gave me some good days. They gave me some really good days. And the one thing I can count on baseball, the one thing I can count on for my Atlanta Braves is that every day they're there, 7:20 first pitch, which of course varies from day and time if it's a road game, etc. But 7:20 first pitch, I know they're there. Every Sunday afternoon, 1:35. And you can spend your entire summer with them, and you get to know the guys that play, that run the team, the whole 9 yards, and they become endearing to you. So you're not just pulling for a jersey like you may be when you watch a college football game. You watch a college football game, you don't know a whole lot about the backstories most of those guys playing the field. You're just like, well, I've always pulled for this team, and I'm pulling for my community usually, or where I went to school. NFL, you get to know them a little bit. But Major League Baseball, you get to know these guys day in and day out, so they become a part of an extended family. And much like our YouTube channel, Braves Country HD, it feels more and more like an extended family every single day. The more folks that come in and chat, I get more of a kick out of that than anything else. Braves get a good win. That's great. Love covering the team, love watching the team, love bringing it to everybody, bringing it to people who can't get it. But what really brings a smile to my face is the folks interacting with each other and having just a great time. All right, that'll do it for us today. This was part of the Once Upon a Pastime series here on Braves Country Baseball. And we will see you next time. Go Braves! More importantly, go baseball.
Goodbye, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. We're back tomorrow with another show. Well, unless we're fired, we'll talk to you then. Goodbye, sweetheart. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Guys and gals, it's time to go. We'll see you on the next show.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
Thanks for listening to Braves Country with Mac Magee and the Armchair Quarterbacks on 99.1 FM WQEE, The Key in Noonan, Georgia, and simulcasting on youtube.com/@Braves Country. Braves Country comes your way weekdays, 3 p.m. Eastern to 5 p.m. Eastern. Please follow, like, and subscribe today. Armchair Quarterback Radio, your first choice for Southern sports.
Something of the 5th of September. Something of the 5th of September. She said a lot that I can't remember. Something of the 5th. Can I get another cigarette, please? Can I get another cigarette, please? Yeah, I know I live to regret it. Just give me another cigarette, please. Can I get another cigarette, please?
You're listening to WQEE 99.1 FM, The Key in Noonan, Georgia.